And for those in Nevada County, the next Get Legit webinar is March 9th. And this one is the only one in the series that is specific to Nevada County. We have had some new ordinance updates for the Nevada County Cannabis Ordinance for cultivation specifically. And so the Nevada County Cannabis Division will be presenting on March 9th to go over all of the ordinance updates, amendment processes, and a lot more really important information for the coming year for those based here in Nevada County. This webinar is going to be recorded. The recording will be available online through our website in about a week or so. And I just really encourage everybody to, stay involved, stay engaged, reach out to your local trade associations. If you're not here in Nevada County, become a member, and just, it takes a village. We're all here together. And I just also want to thank Holly Carter from Oxalis for being here today with us. It is really, we're so grateful for your time. Holly Carter is the owner and principal of Oxalis Integrative Support Services. She has been helping cannabis licenses of all types, hundreds of businesses throughout the state of California with everything from permitting to compliance. And this is just incredibly valuable information here today. And so we're so grateful to have you. And just so everybody knows, you can, as she's presenting, you are welcome to write in questions to the Q&A. You also can write questions into the chat. These webinars are what you make of them. So really utilize this opportunity to ask questions and participate in the discussion here tonight. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Holly. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. I will kind of draw that back just a touch and tell you that I have been working through Oxalis and prior iterations, working in different formats. This is my kitty, sorry. It's cuddle time. With the transition of this industry, primarily focused in, I live and operate in Southern Humboldt, California, and then kind of have branched out from there throughout time, and just getting to learn about Nevada County. So I've appreciated the eyes into this space. What that means is that, like, in terms of depth of knowledge, we know more about that county's, with the ordinance and the particularities of the planning process and upkeep in this county. However, the laws, as we all know, are statewide, and so although there's nuances between different regions in the water board and the CDFW regions, and of course local jurisdictions, there is overarching requirements, and then there's also some federal impacts, of course, that we know more or less about. So I want to first set the tone and just hope that the expectations of what you guys are looking for is matched. So if anything comes up again, I want to reiterate, like, ask the question, throw it in the chat. I did figure out how to open both of those, so I'm able to watch that. Oxalis has been actually operating since 2018, and we do primarily serve cultivators because that's primarily who is operating, especially in our area. And so it's the knowledge base that I primarily have. I have worked on exactly one manufacturing license to assist with licensure in 2018, and then other than that, I've also worked with distribution, and within that, a lot of transportation licenses. So that's helped me touch the distribution rules. So I haven't worked within one, but we do some guidance for them. So when I think of the word audit, and I think a lot of people do, what Maggie even was saying was like the IRS, and I have not personally experienced an IRS audit. Knock on wood, right? I expect that I could and will because of the nature of my business and the nature of all your businesses. The rate of audit is much higher with the IRS for cannabis businesses what they have seen so far in other places, but that has not been my realm. So what I'm going to talk about today, really, I subtitled this like compliance binders, SOPs, and record keeping. And I think a lot about being proactive with preparation, documentation, and cohesive records. The word integrative is in the business name intentionally. We look at aligning all the records across agencies, across documentation, and it can be as simple as making sure that the name of your business is fully the same across all of your documentation. We've seen a lot of that where people will write like such and such farm and then leave farm off somewhere else, add or leave LLC. And so it becomes important to just really look at each detail. So I guess I will back up even more and say that our mission with Oxalis is to assist sun-grown farmers, distributors, and microbusinesses, and especially family operators who are working in the cannabis marketplace, and especially people who are transitioning. We focus on ongoing support, which to me means licensure and on, and then like I was saying, I'm sorry, it's so silly. Making sure that things are integrative and cohesive. So, and then working on strategy and then follow through with going back and making changes when necessary, either to align with the way regulations are transitioning or your operational needs as your business develops. If something changes at one agency, it's quite likely to need to change elsewhere. So I went and looked up just what is an audit, just because of the title and the way that this was presented. I wanted to make sure we were talking all about the same thing. And so this is literally from like Wikipedia. An audit is examination or inspection of records and then physical checking. And so that's what's important is in no matter what it is like, does what you have written down match what is happening? If I show up, and I think we've experienced that, anyone who's had even a DCC inspection, a county inspection, any inspection, it's like, is what you have written down what I can see? And I've heard DCC and prior CDFA, the scientific team say that numerous times. The people reviewing the diagrams always say, well, we want to know what to expect when we come out there. And then the people that are there are like, well, I want it to be what's on the map. So that's one example, and that may not be an audit, but it is in a lot of ways. So there's a difference as well between doing a self-audit or a third-party audit and then an agency audit. And sometimes I will say, like, if I'm coming out to do a pre-site and pre-inspection or a preparation or just talking somebody through it, it's like, maybe I'll see stuff that doesn't align, but that's an opportunity to catch it. And I like to treat inspections that way still. When there's an inspection, it's like, oh, we're here to help. Like we're here to ask the questions, even of the agencies, right? So that's what an audit is. So then I want to talk about like who can inspect and why it's important even to do self-audits or to ask for third-party, like non-agency audits to be done. And one of the things that we became interested in, of course, is how much time they can give. So each of the agencies, what I call the big four, are the DCC, the state, the county or your city, local jurisdiction, the water board, and CDFW. Those are the things I think of as the big four. That said, there are about 20 to 25 other agencies who can and might touch each business depending on your operations and your jurisdictional needs. And that can range from CDFA with the pesticide compliance and the weighmaster compliance, which is two different departments. And then there's the local agriculture and the local scales and the local pesticide. I think I said that twice. Down to, like I said, up to the IRS. There's 3 or 4 financial oversight agencies, some of them state, one of them at least federal, and perhaps local as well. They'll send out requests for property tax, and talk a little bit about that if people are interested. But when they send those, they can, most agencies, once you become a business and you have this property, you can be inspected. So most of them don't have to give notice, actually. I don't know if we can see this, but like 3 out of the 4 of these don't have to give notice. Mostly they will, but they don't have to. And then something that we want became like, I don't know if this has happened in your county, oops, but it happened here just in my own neighborhood, was that we learned that CDFW is and does utilize their deputization, which means that they can carry firearms. So if you have questions about that, certainly reach out to your region and to the heads of enforcement. We started asking questions about like, when do you decide to do that? How do we know it's an agent? The reception was good, but it is a fact that you are permitted through these agencies and they can come. Is there any questions there? I feel like I'd want to pause. I have a cough drop too, just to let you guys know I might need a cough break. Okay, so what will they look for? Every agency requires documentation, and most of them have things that are expected to be maintained and available on site. And as a side, something that's not an agency but is a requirement for all businesses is to also have your entity documentation available. Less so for external, like agency inspections, but more so for internal, and that depends on your business structure. But every agency does require some documentation. And this is just, I want to spend the most time here, but also didn't get into details here. We have created a table of contents that we reached out to all kinds of different agencies and looked into a lot of the different rules. And so we put together a table of contents. It started as a table of contents, then it got into like deeper and deeper, and now we have them available in kind of like 3 levels, like choose your level. A table of contents, a workbook, and then the whole like a whole shebang compliance binder with operational logs and templates and guidance documents and directions and all kinds of things. But the table of contents itself can work as a checklist and an organization tool. And what we did was we reached out and asked, what is expected to actually be here? And when we reached out to kind of the big 4 and then looked at the other agency requirements, especially the DCC requirements, which reference other requirements, and we put together what is expected to be on site. So I can kind of dive into that a little bit if that's where interest is. I could keep going and come back. I can't see anybody, so I can't see if there's like a pulse or a thumbs up or anything. So if you see that, Maggie, let me know.
I will, yeah. I'd say just go for it, and I'll let you know when there's questions that come in.
Okay, I think I'm going to keep going and then come back to this particular piece because this is where I expected there to be. Well, OSHA, can I just answer the questions right out loud, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay, there's questions. So OSHA related documentation and training would be something that could be, asked to be on site. Those are considered employee records and there's agency records. Oh, thank you. OxalesCalifornia.com. And so, yes, I think that is a piece of it, certainly anything to do with employee stuff. And then some of that has to be kept private, but it's still supposed to be available. Let me go to here. I think, let me know later if this doesn't answer your question. Is it? So what is a business record? And I threw this in here because a business record is what we're creating. So I wanted to just talk about some code. I'm a wonk. So I've got codes for us. The DCC has a general record keeping retention requirements, and there's a list of stuff. And it is, you have to have financial records, personnel records, training records. So that would be what was being asked about the OSHA, but also under personnel would be like injuries, sicknesses, things like that. Contracts. So I let people know when you've created a contract with my business, that's a contract. You need to be keeping a copy of that either on site or available for site inspection, or available electronically so that somebody can ask for it. The agencies can ask for it. Permits. And permits is a vague question. When we think of permits, I would often think of the local jurisdiction permit, your county or your city. But there's actually like a permit is the water quality discharge permit. How about a diversion permit? Those are permits as well. So anything, a permit gives you allowance to do it. A license is a similar type of thing. They're like a permit allows you to do it, a license. Oh, it's hard to describe this. How those are different, but there's nuance in the difference there. So the license, again, we think of your DCC state license, but what about your license to be a weighmaster? Your scale permit, your scale certification. It doesn't say certifications, but I would certainly keep copies of those on site. And some things are required to be posted on site, so not only available but put up on the wall. A seller's permit is an example of that. A business license is an example of that. Actually, your DCC state license is an example of that. It says right on it, like, shall be posted, right? So it's supposed to be up and present and visible. And this is what's so funny to me. For the public to view, because you're a business, even if you're not allowed to have public on site, anybody that walks onto that property could see that. So like in my business, our business license is like above the printer, right? It's like it's on the wall. If you walked into the business, you can see it in the room. You could go ask to look at it, and I would say, yeah, go look at it. But it shows that we're like open for business. And then basically I threw in there like anything else required in DCC regulation or state law, like that's a catch-all. But those pieces catch a lot. So when I looked at, there isn't a definition of business record in the DCC, but there's all these record keeping requirements. Two of them that I want to draw your attention to are this section 15051, which is the track and trace requirements. And it's a very short section that is in a very long like article or chapter, whatever it's called. And this, one of the subsections of that section requires inventory reconciliation to occur at least every 30 days and to do a self audit. And I should have written this, and report to the DCC if there is a significant discrepancy found. So if you find a significant discrepancy in your inventory, just going through what's in the metric system, what's in your records, if you use like a third-party software, and you should be checking those two against each other periodically as well to make sure, and your on-site actual real life inventory. If you find a significant discrepancy, you're supposed to tell the DCC and then run an audit. What's significant, I believe at this iteration, it's 5%. It's shifted in the most recent iterations of the regulations. We have inventory reconciliation directions if that's not something you're doing already. And we have a very simple, easy, like, here's how to pull your report out of metric and then go check it. But we make it simple so that you're not like looking. So, and then you have a document that's created there too, something that you can date, something you can stick in your binder or your log or your records, whatever you have, or just have like a PDF version, whatever you need to have. The next section that I wanted to point out is this 17800, right to access. And this was there was only a few places in the DCC regulations that the word audit showed up. And this was one, and it gives the department the right to come onto your property, not the whole property necessarily, the premise. So that's actually an interesting side journey question. You're authorized to come onto your premise, which is designated on your state diagrams for the purpose of inspection, investigation, review, or audit. And so then they're going to come and look at, and we see this, we feel this when we have like what's called metric inspections. It is DCC staff who are looking at your metric system. They're looking at it the day before they come out and watching you catch things up, and then counting it against what's on site. And again, it says they shall have full and immediate access. It is actually a big deal problem if they are not allowed access. So I want to keep that in mind as well. But again, the inventory is not the only thing. And especially if you have other license types, like they can check all your operation plans. So like an example of that would be checking your pest management, whatever you've submitted against what is stored and or signs of use on site and or other records of use. There are certain requirements within the pesticide regulations for documentation there as well, especially if it's an EPA registered product. Wow, just rambling and rambling. And so they can check that. We've had the specific experience amongst people where a full farm with like an orchard and veggies and a whole shebang of operations are going on, and you are allowed to store pesticides on site. And this is from the county agriculture department, which works underneath the state Department of Pesticides. And we're doing some education on to the like the DCC and CDFA prior site staff, because they are not like versed in pesticide regulations, and yet here they are trying to enforce them. So inside your cultivation application packet, you've told them what pesticides you plan to use, and you can't use anything else without changing that plan. We do have a template that we update yearly. I'm getting ready to go to the garden store and shop for pesticide labeling and make sure that things are still all correct. But if it's not on your list, you're not allowed to use it. You are allowed to store it on your property. It is recommended, because of the way that someone can come audit it, that to clearly store them separately or label, these only for cannabis use. And that's actually especially important if you have staff, because you don't want them to mess it up, right? Especially like you run to the store and somebody's like, I'm gonna do this thing. And then I also wanted to point out the evidence code. Evidence code is interesting and important to me because it talks about what actually can be introduced in a civil or a criminal case that would come on any level of, like, it could be a DCC hearing, it could be not a DCC hearing, but it's a business record is any documentation that is made in the regular course of business, and it's created at or near the time of the actual physical occurrence. Shipping manifest, pesticide documentation, a sign-in, sign-out sheet, which is actually required for every premise. So all of these things, like, and just any documentation that you have, like invoicing in my business. There's a lot of things, right? there's actually a lot. There's things that are required within the DCC regulations and other regulations, but great. A sign in, sign out sheet is actually required by, I can figure it out. It is required within state regulations. You could probably search it in the DCC regulations and I can figure that out in a few moments. And it has like a list of what you need to add onto the sign in, sign out sheet. We have an example, we have a template. If your mom comes to your house, is she supposed to sign in? Did she enter the premise? Is your home on the premise? Or is she visiting the premise? And so that's an interesting question, because who comes to your premise on a regular basis? Inspectors, consultants, delivery people, distribution staff, right? All those people need to sign in and sign out. So, and again, we have that's included in like the big compliance binder. Actually, it's included in all the workbooks too, because it's required. Well, it depends on where your premise is. So I can't answer if it's just the grow area, because I don't know what your premise looks like. Your premise diagram outlines the area around your cultivation. We like to draw them really tight for some of these reasons, and also because we live in a place where businesses are happening on family farms, right? So there's children, and children are not allowed in a premise. And also you don't want everybody who's coming over to dinner to have to sign in and sign out, right? So we try to draw them really tight and then exclude things if they happen to fall. Like if your house is in the middle, like I'll try to draw that out. Yes, no, all cultivation, or not just cultivation licenses, need sign in, sign outs all licenses, all of them. And it was something that was previously required within the distribution and the retail. And then with consolidation, it became required of all licenses. And so it's not the property, it's the premise. So get out your premise diagrams and see where that line is drawn, which brings up an interesting and important like side journey licensing note. For a while, the staff at the CDFA who was doing the review of diagrams would advise to just make the whole property the premise because it's easier. If you hear an agency person at any level say it's just easier, ask the question, when is it easier and for whom? And like, is it easier long term? Because that's a great example of it not being easier and staff not understanding that they may be telling people that it's easier to make the whole property the premise when in fact you have, you know, a 5-year-old child at home and then your child is on the premise, which is against state law technically, right? And that law is passed to keep kids out of retail entities, but also it can be a log and you need a signature from every person. Yes, they sign in and out. This is a great side journey question. Let me see if I have it. One moment.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in here to add to this to Elise and Sebastian's questions. I would think, you know, just as, and Holly, definitely correct me if you feel like I'm off here, but you know, as people have experienced when they go to a distribution facility and they have to sign in and sign out when they enter exit. Yeah, this is a great example what you pulled up here. And I would, on your farms, I would think of it as, you know, when people are entering the fenced in cultivation area.
But that may or may not be true. And again, you really need to look at your premise. And if it isn't, if your premise diagram shows your whole property, maybe that's some homework to do.
Yep. Yeah, and for those of you in Nevada County, the March 9th Get Ready webinar with the county, if you have concerns about like what your site plan currently shows as your premise or anything, we will be going in depth next month as about amendment processes and various things if there are any adjustments people want to make, as well as just clarifying, getting further clarification on what you currently have on your site plan.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. And it's also just side journey. An employee, no. So this is actually the regulation. Thank you guys for asking like detailed questions. I wanted to know like what is important. So I just keep rambling to see what hits. Premise action requirements. The premise that's not open to the public. Licensees shall ensure that only employees and other authorized individuals enter. A licensee shall maintain a record of all authorized individuals who are not employees of the licensee who enter the limited access area. So if anybody is not employed by your entity and they come in and out, I mean, I sign in and out. And I will also tell you that locally, I've asked inspectors, regulators, local jurisdiction folks to sign in and out, and they always say that we're the first people that ask that. They're like, I've done this like 3 times, and then they look and they're like, oh, it's the same format because folks are getting this from us. So it's okay if you don't have it yet. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily like try to go back and recreate it, but this is what ours looks like. And so it says it's a log, I suppose. Maintain a record. The record shall include the name of the individual, the company they work for, the reason, the date, and time. And these have to be made available immediately to the department. Now, you know, why would they ask for this? I mean, I guess we don't have to get into that, but we can. It's like, I always think about like, well, why? And this is part of it. You cannot receive consideration or compensation for letting someone in. You can't get paid for somebody to come visit your premise. But as you guys know, you just keep paying. I'm sorry. It's hard. You can pay someone to come over, but you can't get paid for that. And so we created this, and this is actually a super solid example of like the type of things that we create. It's like, here's a simple thing with directions for use. And then we always try to include what the violation could be if it's not done, so that you can decide what to do with that. Okay. And then this question of why retain records for 7 years, and I got a little bit like sidetracked and did not look up their regulation, but they're inside the DCC at least, and perhaps other places. And somebody who maybe Miss Small wants to chime in here about the civil statute of limitations, but agencies have the ability to backtrack, look for things. They can request documentation. I believe that the DCC regulation says that something to the effect of for 2 years after something is or should have been discovered, up to a limit of 5 years. It's backwards. Anyway, when you add it up, it's like you want to keep it for 7 years, which is congruent with how long you generally want to keep records from IRS. You may want to keep them longer, but that's like when they could ask to look at them for. And it has everything to do with the way that their oversight is written and when they can ask for things. So then that effectively creates some kind of, limit. Side journey to the side journey to the side journey. One time when I was first an adult many years ago, I was asking my parents, how long do you keep your IRS records? My dad said about 20 years. So I went and looked it up on the IRS, and it said, 7 years. Unless you've committed fraud, then you have to keep them forever. So that's funny. Standard operating procedures. So we were having an internal conversation in my office yesterday about this, and what is an SOP? It's something that is written to make things standard. So writing it down. And as many of us have experienced, writing it down is where it gets really hard, because we were trained and suggested for many, 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 many years to not write anything down. Probably partially because of this last slide, right? Just saying. Oh, I just made some kind of error. Okay, so we're now it's a benefit to write things down. Depending on your situation, you want to write down more or less. I make a lot of SOPs these days because I hire people, and I want things to be consistent, including me. Within my own company, we do a lot of digital retention of documents, and I was a hot mess in naming things appropriately and making them look consistent. So we made an SOP for it. We made actually a list of how to name documents. I mean, that's an example that may or may not be pertinent to your operations. They might, especially if you're doing something like perhaps a distribution, or even just a naming convention of what your harvest batch names are, right? That's something that you're naming pretty regularly, and you want to probably be fairly consistent so that it makes sense from year to year, especially when your metric starts getting real busy. I'm very curious if metric will purge after 7 years. Old records, we'll see. Yeah, TBD. And so I wrote over here on the side, like the contents that we try to create in like a big deal SOP is the purpose of why this exists, what content is there, who's responsible for it, how often does it happen, what materials might you need to gather. If you're going to do a job, let's say you have an SOP about cutting clones. You're talking about what's the purpose here within this SOP. We're going to talk about this content, and Sally's in charge of cutting clones. Sally's gone and it really needs to happen. Tom is going to do it. We're going to cut clones twice a year. We're going to cut clones every 2 weeks. Whatever works for you. What materials do you need? If you're cutting clones, you need like razor blades, you need rooting gel, you need trays, you need either Rockwell, whatever you're getting together, and you want to have 25 of them, 25 trays ready. You're doing 25 trays every 2 weeks. So you want to get as specific as you can, because being specific helps set up for success. And then you talk about how to actually do it, right? Like you select your mothers, and then you go do your cuts, and then you root them, do 10 cuts at a time so that you're efficient, like whatever you have found works best. And then talk to people sometimes about where to deviate as well. And cutting clones is one example. And then part of that would be like, what record gets created? Well, you want to have a checklist so that you can then go enter that into metric, right? Bring back the metric tags. So just kind of all the procedures. Excuse me. And it just helps people be more successful. So that's what we were talking about within our office was all of these things don't have to be there for it to be an SOP. It can be a checklist. It can be, I mean, how many of us, I have worked like retail. I used to work at a grocery store, and it's like you have an opening checklist and a closing checklist. Don't forget to turn off the lights and check that the toilet's not running, and make sure that the cash drawer is locked, or the till is emptied out, or whatever it is, whatever kind of your role is. And that's where also that responsibility comes in. Like, here's checker one's task list, here's checker two's, or here's all the jobs initial each night, which is what we did in that particular job. So the frequency is also nice. And then what we do is try to like calendar that, right? Let's see what's next. So best practices for documentation. And this is, again, just something that I'm, learning and experimenting with, but really being consistent. And then what I talk about with my employees is what happens if I have a checklist or a workflow or a full, like an SOP or whatever I'm doing, and the thing doesn't work the way that, like, okay, we support people in bill pay because we have a bank account, and a lot of people don't have bank accounts for whatever reason. So we're making payments to agencies. Well, what happens if the receipt doesn't issue? And so if you don't follow the directions, what's the next step? So you have like did anybody read Choose Your Own Adventures when you were kids? I read that book. And so when you get to the part where it's like, you get here and it doesn't work, go call this number or talk to this person or let me know immediately. So you want to have those stop gaps worked in as well. But it does help create consistency within your operations so that people know what to expect and when it's an issue. It also helps the work be accurate and thorough. So those are some good practices for doing your documentation. You want to put in there. And then I wrote down here, what did I write? Ensure cohesion amongst records. And I brought that up just a little bit ago. What is this? Oh, this was oh no.
I just want to chime in. This is so great. And especially for people with employees, I mean, having even just a basic checklist can really, one, it is such like a mental and literal stress release for you, who is the owner and like the employer. But also it is really empowering and can be very empowering to your employees to feel like they have their own kind of autonomy, that you're not, there can be some just like autonomous, I know what to do, here's my checklist, I can feel really confident that I'm like, doing everything the correct way and so forth. And it can really build a stronger relationship, I feel like, within a business.
There's definitely that, and I've experienced that as well as I've grown as a business owner. When I used to just do everything and it was in my head, but it also helped me be thorough and consistent. So I made sure that I was hitting every piece, especially things that you don't do super regularly. And I'll use just license applications as an example for me. We've created a format of all the things I need to ask for. And so it helps me be prepared to do my job, to assist y'all's job when I have a format. Because for a while I was doing, like, I could do them in my sleep, but now it's been a little while and I do a couple, every quarter. So I'm not like doing like 20 of them at a time. So I used to be able to just rattle off all the requirements of just even an application or what goes on a diagram, but now I have lists so that I can check myself. And then what's happening is we turn those things in and they get checked somewhere else as well. So that's just like my own personal example, but I agree with that. And another piece, depending on what your like exit strategy is, I've been talking with people about having SOPs is pulling the knowledge out of your mind, right? Using it as a training module, using it as documentation to show agencies if you need it, and it may be required even for something like Sun and Earth certification or different pieces there. What am I trying to say? So, but also if you're looking to grow the value of the business, right? And so it doesn't necessarily mean that more documentation is better, but if you're looking for investment, ownership transition of any kind, even within family, you know, if you have some kind of secret formula, that is not necessarily I threw up the evidence code earlier and talked about how like things can be, it might have to be disclosed or inspected, but there's also, you can write on it like, this is like some secret sauce, right? Like, this is my secret cloning sauce, whatever it might be. So it can help grow the value of your business as well. I can talk about the table of contents. I'm not going to throw it up here because it is something that I actually sell. So, but I will talk more about what's included, like the basics of what's included for sure. And then I'm getting close, I think, to the end of this. So I just wanted to share this little, I mean, I don't know if it's a gem or not, but the DCC site is, they have this compliance hub. And so there's actually like a lot of information on here that is available to you all. A lot of agency websites, like the DCC is growing and they're developing. So kind of alongside us, we're like maybe straggling a little bit behind. No offense, just saying. But they're learning and they're listening. And one of the things that was heard was like, we need more resources. So there's a lot of things that can help people be independent and successful. And even like, where did that one go? You're licensed, now what? Right? Like what to expect. I'm not sure that they put up the inspection forms on here. We requested new ones to make sure that we can provide those for people, but it has a lot of checklists and just informational material. And then of course, the other agencies sometimes do the same thing. Like, how do I know how to do a thing? I follow the directions on the website, or I follow the checklist on the form. So utilize those things. Like, don't get lost. Like the back of an 8300 form, the form itself is a page, but it's like an 6 or 8 page document. So the other stuff is information. It describes what should go in every box, and then that matches other regulations and can be expanded. And you can call them if you need to call the IRS and ask about how to file an 8300. Alliances and trade groups, as Maggie was saying, like working super hard, super appreciate the collaborative work to just bring the education to the people and to each other. And then social media and community conversations, take them with a grain of salt, listen to them, check your references, because people say a lot of things. A lot of it is awesome. A lot of it is really well intended. Some of it is, you know, it's all run through a filter, right? So you want to listen and work together and also check your references, because the thing to remember is it's your business and it's your risk assessment. So just saying. And then of course we have a lot of resources and service options from our business. And I'll come back to the table of contents as one resource and service option. So it's available as a DIY. We try to make everything available so that it's like, and I'm still developing this, which is part of the development of SOPs and checklists and documentation, is I'm learning how to document what I do. And in doing that, I'm training employees, but I'm also turning around and making that available for somebody like y'all, so that you don't have to learn from scratch how to do it. But we do like sell them, some of them for nominal charge, some of them for like more because they're more in depth, more complicated. I've just like taken more to put together. So we try to share the wealth in that way, but it's still like less than the hours it would take you to put it together, right? And then we do things like full service. So in the local community, especially, like you can dump off your box of records and I'll go through it and organize it and audit it and see what's missing and try to go get it from agencies if I can and let you know, and then create a plan for how to follow through.
And I'll just plug you a little more that the website's right there. It's also in the chat.
Hey!
The workbooks that you have made and that you offer to people are really amazing and really thorough. and
Yeah.
just like such helpful templates for folks.
Thank you. There are two biggest ones that are like the most helpful is what I was saying about the table. So it's a table of contents, and then it is like the expansion pack and the expansion pack to the expansion pack. So it's like just can be the table of contents with kind of the regulations that we reference. Mostly those are like, we've included a sign-in sheet because it's required. And it was like, that's an easy one to pull together. So within the table of contents, you do kind of get a few things. It's broken down into major categories like business entity documentation, ownership documentation, actually like who the owner is as well, but mostly entity documentation, and then licenses and permits, which includes local jurisdictions, and then the other things that I've mentioned, like pesticide compliance and, excuse me, weights and measures compliance. So all the things that are considered, oh, and then like seller's permits, things that you need to have on site. And then we get into land and water, like the environmental aspects. So those also are permits and licenses, but we created a separate section because that is like, it can be, for some people, it's like a binder or two binders within a few years, because it houses not only your notice of applicability for your water quality discharge, but the site management plan, which can be a lot, and then every year's report. And those are, you don't have to necessarily have them printed out, but things like your LSA, your lake and stream bed alteration, the agreement, the notification that predated the agreement that told the agency what you planned on doing, and then all of the compliance documentation, especially until you have submitted it, or until it's complete and written off and considered like that you fully have met any of the mitigation factors. So that's some of it. And then what comes next? Then we just sort of have this in the main table of contents. It also talks about, you want to have the employee records, financial records, inventory, and track and trace records. And then we include things like I said, like the sign in, sign out sheet, information about power reporting, because that's something that's kind of new on people's minds. So I'm putting it out there in every one of them. And actually also the table of contents, when it's a workbook, and like the master big pack comes with what we call the reporting and renewal template, which is a spreadsheet that lists out all the things that have recurring due dates and has space for you to put your due dates in there. And that's also a service that we'll do where we'll help fill that in, identify missing documentation. And then we have actually a calendaring service where we'll enter them all into our universe and then send you reminders. And if you're local, or maybe not local, and you don't want to run things through your own financial world, you can, we'll use our bank account to submit payments to agencies for you, and then like track the finances for the end of the year. So we don't do accounting, but we'll do compliance bill pay. And then what else? Oh, I was going to say we include like the disaster relief regulations and a template letter, which actually is also available for free on our website, because that's just like, you need to have that when you need to have that. So somebody asked a question. If you have someone responsible for document retention and you find out not everything was kept as it's supposed to be, would it be detrimental to ask the business to ask the DCC for copies of the old records you no longer have access to? No, but anything that they have will be in your portal. Otherwise, I'm curious how else the DCC would have the records. But if you don't know how to get into your application portal, that is totally something I can assist with. And of course, the DCC can assist you with it. I don't know that it would be detrimental, but one thing that I would point out is that you, as the business owner, and especially as a designated responsible party, which is like a named person, you can delegate other people, but it's all you. So it's all you. And that's true of any business. Like that's true of my business. It's me. I'm in charge of everything my employees do. But your risk is higher, so because you're being watched, like your inventory, when they come out and they announce that they're going to do a metric audit, They're looking to see if you're catching things up. And then they're telling you when they get there, if you caught things up the day before, we had an inspection where they said, well, you shouldn't have updated things last night. And we can tell you haven't been updating. We're like, no, we just made some decisions yesterday about what product could go and clearing down mothers. And you don't have to, you don't have access to metric anymore. That's a great question, and I'd be happy to ask that. If you want to shoot me an email, instead of Office, you can write it to Holly so that, oops, there I go, editing my my stuff. You can shoot me when it's Holly at Oxalis, California. Oh, look at this. Good thing I can edit. The Office goes to all my staff as well, but if you didn't want to have, if you wanted me to ask that question on how to do that, I'd be happy to ask those kinds of questions. Sometimes they'll let me, and sometimes they won't, because I'll say, oh, it's just a general question. They're like, no, girl, you're talking about a revoked license. There's only like 20 of them. Or I don't know if that's true. I made that up. But sometimes they'll let me do that. Does anybody else have any questions?
I have a quick question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Would it be, and as I say this, I am not somebody who wants to print excessive amounts of paperwork out by any means, but also maybe for some people like myself who are maybe control freaks or orderly, would it make sense regarding the 7-year retention to have a binder, like a 2021 binder, a 2022 binder, 2023 binder, because and just for like sake of, I don't know, is that an efficient way to think about that, or how does that land for you?
So my favorite answer of all time is it depends, but I would say not necessarily. So the way that we'll approach it is like I have clients that like refresh their binders every year. They're maintaining things and they're tucking, just like I do, like tucking pieces of paper into like margins, right? And then I take it in and go through it all. And I take out everything that is no longer like current, and I put it in an archive box. And so at that point, we're like refiling it with little file folders for the archive, but keeping the most up-to-date piece in the binder so that this is what's current. And if you would like the archive, we'll go into the archive. You also can keep things digitally. And part of our binder workbook, and probably the table of contents too, comes with this like electronic record keeping notification. There's a regulation that inside the regulation that talks about how to keep things on site and what they can ask for. Again, there's some things that like each agency just wants a piece of paper there. This is deviating a little bit from your question.
No, that's great. That's definitely
helpful. Yeah, no, I think you don't have to I guess here's what I'm saying. You don't have to reprint it out, right? You don't have to, if you have a seller's permit, your same seller's permit lasts forever. You don't get a new one every year. You check that it's still active, but you don't have to give a new one in there. Yes. Is there a requirement to keep let me make sure I answered Maggie's question and then I'll get into Emily's question.
Oh yeah, no, that was perfect for mine.
Okay. So Emily, this is a great question. And I would personally keep them. They are a signed document, and so they are expected to be retained for 7 years.
I'll just say the question is there any requirement to keep transport manifest records or COAs physically?
And of course, with the nod that they do pile up over years, yes, they do. And so I think, yeah, you have to put them in an archive. So you don't get to keep like a binder anymore, right? They do pile up, and so you just have to those you don't necessarily have to have like up front and ready, but you should have them available, and the associated documentation. And this is something we get into more in our sales compliance workbook, like what is sales don't just have those pieces, and as you pointed out, the COAs, if you're transporting something that has been tested, yeah, you want to have those. And yeah, probably. I'll come back to that. That's a great question, Emily. You want to, the Waymaster and the invoice that are also supposed to accompany every transaction, every transfer. And those are both required by DCC, but also by like the weights and measures. That's a document that's supposed to go with every transaction or sale by weight or count, like in the state. So it's not just weight, it's like everywhere. Emily is wondering if the DCC would allow for scans of the completed and signed forms instead of physical copies. The DCC might. I'm not sure that they wouldn't do that. They might want to have you retain them, especially for like the past few years, and then archive them. But I would imagine that they would want to know that that really physically existed somewhere, because they can ask for it in whichever format they want. Let's see if we can find that regulation. You guys can see all my records, record retention. It's like all the old versions too, right? You see my own little method here. Oh, it does specifically say records must be kept. It used to say 5 years with 2 year, blah, 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 blah. Records must be kept for 7 years from the date of creation unless a shorter time is specified. Records are included but not limited to. And then they must be stored in a secured area where they're protected. And so this is an interesting one. See how like the DCC does this, and of course all law like tries to tie it to each other. All records required by this other agency. So what are those? Go find out. You know, like they're just being like, go read these. And that's, you know, side journey again to the side journey is what we did when we like back in 2018. Here's Holly sitting in the bath reading regulations, underlining everywhere that it pointed to another set of regulations and trying to read them all. Do I remember them all? No, but they're all still there to look up, and they all do change as well. Electronic records. This is just that statement that I was talking about. Like this is something we would include in binders to say, here's how it goes. If you're one of our clients, we put our name at the bottom as well because we are holding records for people. She got rid of the question. I was trying to make sure I answered that specific question. I would read that rule, but it does say that it needs to be kept for 7 years. And then there was, where did it say? Oh, records must be kept in a manner that allows the records to be produced for the department, either hard copy or electronic form. So I always just go to the regulations if you guys have questions, as you may notice. They have to be legible and accurate. They may not intentionally misrepresent or falsify. I mean, that's good practices to not do that. But it looks to me like the regulation language changed a little bit because it used to say whatever the agency requested. And so we were waffling a little bit with that electronic records, but now it's saying like you have to be either produce, you have to produce them. When we've asked in the past, sometimes the agency, and again, they kind of go through their iterations, have said like, well, however we want them. It's like, well, is that reasonable? Again, I would say best practices are to keep things like that. Gosh, but that it does pile up. So, but if you're going to have scans, having scans like, let me use this as an example. We use Google Docs, as you can see, like I'm in my Google life, and we'll create like an invoice and the Waymaster within spreadsheet, and that's not the signed copy. Also having a signature, I don't know the what signature is required. This is a great question for an attorney.
Taking note of all the questions. We can come in and get back to everybody later. But
there had been some debate about like whether or not a wet signature is required. Like some places require what they call a wet signature or a notarization. That's obviously not necessarily required here, but they do want a signature on certain pieces. Waymaster receipt is an example of that, and an invoice. So yeah. Great questions.
Yeah, if anybody has any other questions for Holly, now is a great time. Type them into the chat or the Q&A. This has been such great information. I know all of us, even if we keep records, we can always keep them a little bit better. And so it's really good reminders and just how organization pays off in the end. It saves
Yeah,
time.
and I will also say, I mean, there's been times where, again, I support people on inspection. So an inspector will come and they'll ask for something and we'll say, oh yeah, and you also want to see this or that, and we'll kind of pull out a really nice, clean looking file, or here's our binder, and I'll open it up. And I've literally had an inspector say like, oh, we love this. We know what to expect. We know what, like, they love that. They love that. They want to know what to expect, and they can easily flip through and know what sections some things are going to be. So they didn't have to ask us to go dig around. They could just, here's the binder. Like, it's all here, it's all labeled, and they get like excited in a weird way. It makes their job easier. And then they're gonna go home faster.
That is the goal.
And they get they get impressed. They get impressed by labeling your cultivation area. It's not required. You don't have to say bed A, B, C, D. They love it. It tells them that you are organized and that you're keeping track.
And yeah, I think that is incredibly important. I mean, we all know that we are pioneering this industry really, and it goes in a tremendous amount of way to show that type of business and industry responsibility. And it's really our own efforts to put our best foot forward. You know, everybody's putting their heart and soul into their businesses, and this is just a really great way to make sure that you're taking care of that your precious business that you're building.
It also does go a long ways when if there is issues, to be like, hey, here's all the things I have done, to be upfront, to be on top of my things. Like, it gets busy. And
Absolutely.
some of that, documenting that, and I mean, that's something that we do a lot, and your alliances are going to do a lot, is be like, hey, yo, this is too much, right?
Yeah.
But if you're doing what you can as best you can, then that's helpful.
Well, I want to just say thank
It is like 5:06, but part of me was also wanting to, and I didn't include this anywhere, but
you.
we have this state program that is mandate, like, has been given direction by our state legislature to create a cannabis program that allows us to be exempt from the Department of Justice oversight. And so when we're asked for records, when audits come up, when issues come up, showing compliance protects the state. It helps the state protect us from the federal government.
That's awesome.
For now. For the time being. I mean, I'm not saying that that part will change, but like, while we're in the federal situation that we're in, that's a part of the rule. In my personal and professional opinion, that's a part of the rule of a lot of these rules.
That's so great. Well, I want to say thank you again, Holly. This is such incredibly helpful information. And we just really, really appreciate you sharing all of this information with us. I highly recommend people to check out Oxalis's website and check out the templates and the services they offer to keep you and your business in tip-top shape.
And we're here because you are. So if things are coming up that are questions, I love to hear that. Like, what are the pinch points? What are the issues? And what's your next most important thing?
Absolutely. And just as a reminder, this has been recorded. All Get Legit webinars have been recorded and are available on our website, nccannabisalliance.org. There is a tremendous amount of information and just really helpful small business support and compliance support in those webinars. So check that out. Reach out if you have continuing questions, and just know that there is support here for you. And yeah, just thank you again, Holly, and everybody for joining us this evening. And we hopefully will see you all next month, and stay tuned on our website for future Get Legit webinars.